Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, we welcome you once again to the next Good CEO conference. And we are here in one of our breakout sessions for the good lifestyle. And I'm very, very excited to introduce to everyone our speaker for this afternoon. Naku, nasa Denmark po siya ngayon. It's very early, 6 a.m. We are of course very thrilled to have him with us today. So let me do a quick introduction of our resource person. Okay, he supposedly grew up in a haunted house and was told to sleep early because there were aswang outside their bedroom window. Who would have known that these stories would later influence and inspire him to write the comic book TRESE, co-created with artist Kajo Baldissimo. Their comic book is a three-time winner of Best Graphic Literature of the Year in the Philippine National Book Awards 2009, 2011, and 2012. He is also the writer and co-creator of the Dark Colony Book 1, Mikey Resho and the Secret of the Demon Dungeon, which also won the same award in 2013. Budget was a co-editor for Alamat Comics, The Lost Journal of Alejandro Pardo, Creatures and Beasts of Philippine Folklore and Sound, a comic book anthology co-edited with Charisse Locke, published by Difference Engine. He now works in Denmark as one of the creative leads in the Lego agency. Wow, fantastic. He lives there with his wife and son, far away from any aswang, or so they think. So, friends, without further ado, please welcome Mr. Budget.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me here. It's always interesting when I get an invite, especially from Donald Lim, my old boss. Let me quickly get to telling you a story, and I hope I hope you find it relevant for the especially after all these days of hearing stories from other people in the industry. So let me share screen. Share screen. There you go. And I hope we are sharing. All right. So today, I will take you on a magical quest. Well, simply put, it's where do I find inspiration to tell my stories? And normally it starts off with a blank page like this. These are the places I go to usually help me find something that will fill in this blank page. And I hope that one of these stories will be useful for you as you tell your story. So yes, my name is Budget, and I have always been a comic book fan. I've always been a Batman fan. And I have never outgrown my love for Batman. This was my first comic book. I drew this. I wrote and drew this. I can't remember anymore. Maybe back in the 80s. As you can see, I just found scrap paper at home. I stapled it together and started to create my own comic books. And I sold this comic book for 25 centavos to my mom. And after she read it, I got the same copy and then I sold it to my dad for 25 centavos. So I could, clearly say that it was sold out in a day. In 1994, I became part of Alamat Comics. A lot of us were fresh out of college students. Some of us were just started in the workforce, but all of us loved comics. And somehow we met each other at a comic book event, and decided to create, self-publish our own stuff. But as you can see, a lot of these titles maybe except for Jerry Alangilan's Wasted, a lot of them, didn't get past issue 1 or 2 or 3. So, I ended up not continuing doing comics. But it was in 2005 when Kadjo Baldissimo invited me to create a comic book with him. And by this time, we were both working for ad agencies. And I guess it was a break for us. It was a sort of, it was a break from work. It was a mental break from the stress of working in an ad agency where you get rejected on a daily basis, right? We were in the creative department of ad agencies. And if you're in the creative department, you're constantly pitching your ideas. You pitch it to your partner who would reject it. You pitch it to your boss who would reject it. And if you do get past your boss, you pitch it to your client who would then reject it and then tell you that it's needed yesterday. And if you do get it approved by client and you produce it, and sometimes you get to work with celebrities, it's essentially you produce it and you pitch it to your audience. And sometimes your audience rejects it as well, right? So it's part and parcel of working in an ad agency. That rejection is part of your everyday meal. So for us, creating TRESE was like, this is the project we'll do, and we don't need anyone's approval. We just need each other for this. And our working dynamic with Kadjo was exactly that. It was, I'll pitch you a story, you draw it, you send me the pages, and I'll write the dialogue for your pages. And we started photocopying it. If you can see what Kadjo is holding, the original TRESE was that small because it was just Xerox, and we sold it for 30 pesos. But eventually, we finished enough stories to pitch it to a publisher, and eventually get into bookstores. So TRESE is about a paranormal investigator named Alexandra TRESE, and she's the one that the police call whenever the case involves an aswang, a multo, or an encanto. And for some of you who got to watch the anime, it came out last June. So thank you very much for watching that. So after 15 years of being a comic book, it finally got adapted for the screens. TRESE was largely influenced by my love for Batman, as well as detective stories, which I grew up watching and reading. It was also largely influenced by Neil Gaiman's work. So Neil Gaiman has written a lot of stories about mythologies, and obviously it's like mostly Western mythologies. In his stories, he talks about magical places. So for this first part, I want to talk about the magical places which I'm more familiar with, and that's Metro Manila. This is a great shot of Makati, and it's a thriving metropolis. But what I find interesting about Manila is that we still have, in the middle of this very modern metropolis, we've got 400-year-old churches, and in front of these churches, we've got people selling you anting-anting, selling you agimat, selling you all sorts of things in bottles which are supposed to make you stronger, make you healthier, make you have babies. So it's interesting how even though we're very modern society, that we still cling to these beliefs. I grew up hearing the story of the White Lady of Balete Drive, and I'm sure if I asked any of you out there, you would have your own scary story about the White Lady of Balete Drive. I grew up here reading headlines like these about a manananggal being sighted in Manila. And to me as a kid, seeing it on a newspaper felt like, wow, this must be real. Aswang must be real because The newspapers are reporting about it. In my research, I came across a story that came out in the Daily Express in 1973 about a house in Parañaque that was supposedly haunted. And according to the report, a newlywed couple with their 6-month-old son had moved into the house, and they started to experience paranormal activity in the house. Lights would switch on and off in some rooms. They would hear voices coming from empty rooms. One of them woke up at 3 in the morning looking for his slippers, and he saw the slippers walking away from him. Um, and all of these paranormal things were happening to people in the household, except for the mother in the house. And she said she didn't believe in any of these, things, that people were making it up and it was all a joke. But one summer afternoon, she had given a bath to her little baby. And after giving a bath to the baby, she put the baby on the bed. She turned around quickly to get some clothes for the baby. And as soon as she looked at her baby again, half of her child's face had wrinkled up and started to look like an old man's face. And that's when she realized that all of the stories she had been hearing about the house was real. And the only thing she could think of doing at that point when she saw her baby was she slapped her baby. She slapped her baby and commanded the spirit that possessed her baby to leave it. But the thing on the bed didn't cry. It just stared back at her, as if daring her to do it again. And that's when she got down on her knees and started to pray. And she said she prayed for what felt like the longest time until her child's face returned to normal. According to the report, the couple that lived there was BUDJETTE TAN, BUDJETTE TAN, and the name of their child is BUDJETTE TAN. That's the story I kept hearing when I was a kid. So while everyone else had really nice and cute, fun stories from their parents, my mom kept telling relatives and friends this story about the time we lived in a haunted house. And yes, as mentioned by Chito, my dad was the one who would tell me stories of, matulog ka na, may aswang dyan sa labas ng bintana. So we had ghosts in the house, we had aswang outside the house. I guess it affected me somehow. Thankfully, I didn't go crazy, but it all ended up on the comic book page. So yes, so a lot of the stories that ended up on TRESE were based on stories I heard from my childhood, that I heard from relatives, that I heard from our kasambahay, who came from the different provinces. Connected to this is a book that I co-created with David Hontiveros, again with Kadjo, my partner in crime, Bo Guerrero and Mervin Malonzo. And it's a compilation of different creatures from the different islands of the Philippines. Of course, we have the aswang, we have the nuno sa punso, which is normally found underground. We have the manananggal, which, of course, is said to like fly around the provinces and has this long tongue that sneaks into rooftops to suck out the babies from pregnant women. And then we have the tikbalang. According to the stories, the tikbalang wait for you at those provincial crossroads and would either cast a spell on you so that you would get lost and never find your way home, or it would challenge you to a wrestling match. And that if you lose the wrestling match, you go insane, you lose your mind. But if you are able to pluck out one hair from the mane of the tikbalang, it will supposedly grant you a wish. But that's a very tough wrestling match. So the question is that I asked myself whenever I write a TRESE story is, where are they now? Did they move to the city? And if they are in the city, where is the most likely place that they could be found? So maybe the nuno is not a nuno sa punso. Maybe it's now a nuno sa manhole. The manananggal are now flying around the high rises of the cities, and they are looking into the condos for pregnant women. Or they have now formed the largest kidnapping ring in the city and have gang wars with the aswang. And the tikbalang don't wait for you anymore in provincial roads because nobody passes by those roads anymore. But they now wait for you by the highway at 3 in the morning and challenge you to a drag race. So that's an example of, like, looking at the city again and seeing what is something, is there a secret story hidden in that part of the city? And I just happen to be telling it along with Kajo. Let's talk about magical items next. There was, if you go to significantobjects.com, this was a project and an experiment done a couple of years ago. And what they did was they bought items from garage sales and from thrift stores. And a lot of these items were 50 cents, 75 cents, or $1. And then they put them on eBay. But instead of just putting a description of coffee mug, looks like baseball, they got writers to write stories about them. And they branded it as fiction. But they said, here's a story about the person who used to own the mug, or here's a story that it's actually, a magical object, or this is actually an object from the future. And when they added stories about these cheap items, people started to bid on them. And the $1 item sometimes sold for $100. And collectively, all of these items on the first year of the experiment sold $2 million. So it goes to show you the power of story, of how it gives an ordinary object something magical for people that makes them feel this is worth my money, right? And thinking about that, how an ordinary cell phone, a cell phone that we probably wouldn't be using now, or maybe it's a cell phone that our grandparents are still using, maybe it has the number of the San Telmo, and that if you dial it in front of a burning candle, you could actually summon this fire elemental and ask advice from it. Surround yourself with magical people. And I'm not talking about, your neighborhood manghuhula or manghihilot. I'm talking about the people who inspire you. This is my college barkada. When we were all thin and had a lot of hair, but these were the guys I grew up with, and sometimes we would hang out at the local donut shop and just talk about stories. We would talk about stories until 3 in the morning. And these are the stories that later on inspired me, and I continue to work with some of these guys on the comic books that I make. This is the team that put together the TRESE anime. You have Shanti, Jojo, and Jay Oliva on the left side. At the top upper right hand corner, that's Tanya along with the team, and Liza Soberano, who wrote the TRESE anime. And then on the lower right hand corner, that's Kajo along with Nida Ramirez, our publisher. Find the magical people who know more than you do and who are better at doing things than what you can do. Find the people who have that same vision and want and strive to do the same magical thing that you're doing, and work with them, because it's in the collaboration. It's when people come together with their different magical abilities that you are able to create the amazing and the extraordinary. and thus the result of, of finally our little photocopied comic book becoming a TRESE series. Um, and um, and and that all happened, and that all came into play, because of this final step. Once you've gathered all of those ingredients, you now need to start making the magic. And again, you come back to a blank page. And from that blank page, you end up creating, all of these comic books. And it's just, it required for me and Kajo to just keep our heads down and keep working on those stories. And eventually, when we were ready, that's when we started to pitch it to publishers and found Nida. And in the past 15 years, we've come up with 7 books. We're working on our 8th book. And here's a little secret: if you put all of these covers together, it actually forms a puzzle. So a great reason for you to collect all of the books, just so you can piece it together. And again, we got a fantastic first season from Netflix. And thanks to the Netflix, the popularity of the Netflix show in the past couple of months, we have been in the top 10 bestseller list of National Bookstore. And I think this is the first time I can, in my life, where 4 of our books were in the top 10 list. We are available in the Philippines through Avenida, and we have been published in the United States by ablaze.com. And last month, we are now in Italian, thanks to Star Comics. But it all goes back to this. It all starts with this, of you sitting down by yourself and facing this blank page, facing the blank computer screen, and writing down your ideas and writing down your plans. There is one last magical ingredient that's very, very important. After you take a tour of the city, find these magical objects, find these magical people, there's one last ingredient left, and that's you. Remember, in the entire history of the universe, you're the only you that has ever existed and ever will exist. There's nobody in existence who is you, and no one can see the world the way you see it and can tell the rest of us how it looks. And it might be so different and so beautiful that it changes everything. From my favorite writer, Grant Morrison. So be with the people who make you see the magic in the everyday. Visit places. It might be new places and it might be your favorite places, and discover their fantastic secrets. Find the extraordinary stories in ordinary objects. And lastly, most importantly, share your story and tell it in your own way. Thank you very much. I look forward to hearing about your stories in the future. Thank you. I hope that was useful. Looks like I went a little bit over time. Okay. And while we wait for Chito to come back, um, it was interesting to get invited to again to this event, and I asked Donald, what should I talk about? And I was looking at all of the other speakers, and I was wondering, can I really contribute anything to the discussion? And he just said, just tell your story, is what he said. And yes, Chito is about to pop up, and so I hope I've shared in the best way I can my little story. I might have gone off strat, But
No,
Donald
no.
Trump.
First of all, Budget, thank you so much. What an inspiring story, no? Salamat for sharing your story to all of us this afternoon. Well, morning in your case. Really love what you said. No one can see the world the way you do. So maybe I can jumpstart the questions for this specific session. Um, Very simple. What for you is a good story? And why do you think Filipinos like us should, take charge of our own narrative?
Yeah, I think I think like any of us, a good story is something that makes us go wow, and it's not a shallow wow. It's not the shallow wow. Okay, yun. It's really something that my favorite author Jonathan Carroll said that an authentic wow really just comes from your gut, right? And you sense that when you read a story or watch something and you're just stunned, or it just makes you jump out of your seat. And I think it's the same for any business, or any product out there. I'm still in advertising. I'm still a tech geek. Well, not as geeky as a lot of guys, but there are some things out there that make that when I read about a new service or a new product, that makes me go, wow, that's I've never thought of it, of doing it that way. So, and sometimes it could be the simplest of things, and not exactly an epic, an epic story. It doesn't always need to be an epic story. Sometimes it's the most personal of stories that's blown me away.
I agree. That story which should really resonate the most to your audiences. And well, first of all, congratulations on the success of TRESE. My God, it's such a big hit. When it came out on Netflix, parang lahat tayo, we were excited to watch it, di ba? And all over social media, people were really talking about it. Um, did you ever think it would go this far when you were conceptualizing it? I mean, what was your thought process, or what was the vision, at the onset of the process?
Yeah, again, when me and Kajo started it, it was a side project. It was a stress reliever. It was a personal project. And when we started it, Chito, we just photocopied, I don't know, 30 copies, half of which went to family and friends. So parang, uy, may bago kaming comics.
Wow, okay.
And then yun, we sold it in one store because kaibigan namin yung may-ari ng store, Comic Quest, because that's where
Yeah.
I buy my comics. So nakiusap ako na, can I sell my comics with you? And I really think it was because, I mean, we were able to reach this far because we focused on the work. We focused on doing something that we really liked. We didn't have an audience in mind. We didn't know, unlike, again, working in advertising, you're thinking, who's the target market? How can we reach, the maximum number of this target market that we had in mind? Our target market were ourselves. It's like, how can I tell a story that would get Kajo excited to draw, and Kajo wants to draw pages that would get me excited to continue writing the story. And I think we just focus, especially on the first year when we were doing TRESE, on the first maybe 2 years of TRESE, before we found our publisher. But I think, and so there, so we focused on the work, we poured our hearts into it,
Yeah.
uh, and did the stuff which we didn't see anyone else was doing. I think maybe that was also it. It was like after, excuse me, after like what, 10 years of, after a childhood of reading comics and like 10 years of trying to do our own comics, I think it finally sunk in the back of my head of like, ha, no one's doing a story like this. Let me try and do it. And Trece was the product, and thankfully people found it resonated with them.
Yes, yes.
Our publisher, it was a very easy. It wasn't even a negotiation with our publisher Nida. It was like she said, "Sure," the moment we sent it over.
No brainer.
Yeah, Tanya Yuson picked up the first three books, and somehow, yeah, it struck a chord with her that made her think, I can do something with this. And the other, epic story I love to tell is it took Tanya and Shanti 10 years of pitching TRESE before it finally got produced.
Wow, fantastic. So it was a journey, definitely, budget, no. Okay, I have another question here. Um Filmmaking is a collaborative process. Can you take us through the collaborative process and how you managed to do it during the pandemic?
Well, production wise, the moment Jay Oliva, our showrunner and executive producer, came on board, Jay and Tanya became the captains of the ship. And because it's anime, so in other words, they were in control of everything. And that's, I guess, part of the thing I was trying to say about find magical people. Because the last thing you want to do is micromanage these people, right? Um, so because they've been at it longer than you have. I mean, I might be a pretty okay comic book story writer, but they've been producing TV shows and directing shows for years. I even my experience in advertising in producing a TV commercial doesn't compare to the knowledge and skill level that they have. So trust your collaborators, and give them the feedback, give them honest feedback as much as you can, but eventually trust them to do their jobs because there's a reason why you picked them. There's a reason why you decided to work with these people. If you're just going to micromanage them, then just hire someone to be your hand, to execute your ideas. So there. So and because it's animation, it actually worked to the benefit of Jay and Tanya because then a lot of the teams were working from their own studios and their own
Yes.
homes
Yes.
versus having to shoot it live.
Great, great. Okay. I have another question for you. Of course, again, you are now a pride of the country, Filipino pride. Thank you for waving our flag up high. So the question, no, from our friends is: the creative industry has done wonders for Korea, but now how can the Philippine creative industry lead, no, naman, no, in this either regional or global arena?
Yeah, I think from a very the most actionable thing we can all do is support local, right? One of the interesting things that happened because of the popularity of the anime is um, people started to news websites and news shows started to recommend other local comic books. They started to
Mhm.
write articles about, oh, this comic book, this Pinoy comic book should be the next anime. And it's great that this discussion has started. But if we really want to make our creative community thrive, then we should continue to support them. One of the interesting things also that we saw when Netflix started to promote the anime was somebody. It turns out later on I found out it was a friend of mine. Post did a very simple Facebook post. He said, "Please watch TRESE on the official Netflix channel. Do not watch it on pirated channels." And his Facebook post went viral. So, um, so I mean, point being that, yeah, I mean, if you're going to please support local comics, don't download their comics, don't pirate it. And that's from a very, everyone can do that. That's something that we can do right now. And then from a bigger standpoint, it took if Visprint, our publisher, was one of the few publishers at that time that took a risk in doing comics. If
Mhm.
you look at comic book publishing in the Philippines within what the 90s and the early 2000s, maybe only one or two comic book projects came out. So it requires somebody to take a risk. The people, especially the what do you call this? The people in platforms who can support to take a risk in things that might not look viable right now. And that's what Nida did. She was one of the first publishers that supported the works of Carlo Vergara, Jaja Zatorna,
Okay.
Alex
Yeah.
Abrea's Kiko Machine. Um, at that time, David Hontiveros came out with a series of horror novellas, and of course Bob Ong, Bob Ong's books. So again, in that time period, that was a weird mix of books to publish. While all other publishers at the time were staying the course. Let's print children's books. Let's print textbooks. Let's reprint Noli Me Tangere and El Fili because we know this will sell. So somebody took a risk, and eventually other publishers. Thankfully now, if you look at the publishing scene, there are now more Filipino publishers publishing comic books, and that becomes your source material for what can eventually
Correct.
go transmedia.
That's nice. That's nice. Okay. Well, our theme, no, for our event is the good next gen CEO. And again, we'd like to thank you for sharing your story this afternoon. My last question, budget, is how do you think can good stories actually help in creating good communities or ultimately even in nation building? I know it's a bit abstract, but I really love what you said a while ago when you spoke of magic, or when you spoke of inspiring people. But for you, how do you think can stories ultimately transform communities?
There was an interesting case study about the service industry in the United States. And turns out one of the things that they do at the Ritz Carlton Hotel Group is that they gather their people together to exchange stories. What were the stories? What were good service stories that you can share today? How were you able to help a guest today? And they shared it in small groups and they shared it in big groups. They celebrated these moments when they were able to make a guest feel at home in a Ritz Carlton hotel. And according to the person, I forget now, but I love his quote. He said, "You create folklore about your company. You create folklore more than an email, more than getting a Viber message.
Mhm.
It's stories that spread, right? And when you have a really good story, that you don't need the internet for that to spread. People will naturally share it within their colleagues, and eventually it will spread out to the community. So and it was positive stories. It was like how did you help someone today? How did you make someone's day better? How did you make somebody smile today? With your service, with your business, with your product, with your story. I think that's the feedback we get with TRESE. It's people come back to us and share, on social networks and email. They would say, thank you for sharing this story. I grew up with these stories. I remember my Lola telling me these stories. So it makes them feel good, right? And they eventually end up sharing it with other people. So I guess that would be it. That's the value of the story, and it's encouraging a culture of sharing the stories that make people's days better.
Fantastic. Wow, this has been a meaningful discussion. Any final word or message for young leaders like me, or even for kids, to follow their dreams, budget?
I think it comes down to that again, Chito. I mean, it's one of my favorite channels or social channels is the Humans of New York, and I don't think he's that
Yeah.
active these days. But if you
Yeah.
used to follow it, it's something that just brightens your day, or it makes you sit back and reflect about things, right? So I love finding out about the behind the scenes stories. So even if I know nothing about that business, when Honda came out with a documentary on about their failures, I'm not a car guy. I'm not a motorhead, but hearing the stories of the people within Honda and about how they failed, but continued to strive and do better. That's what's interesting for me. So I think that's what I would love to hear. Stories from the next CEOs, stories from the entrepreneur who is having a hard time now, or an entrepreneur who was able to go over that hurdle, and share us, what helped him get through that obstacle and get to where he is now.
Great, great. So with that, I would like to thank you again on behalf of the entire organizing committee and of course the Management Association of the Philippines. Budget, maraming salamat. May God bless you. And please keep on creating fantastic stories for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Bye, Chito. Thanks, Donald.
Thanks, Donald.